let's move to head coach. Criteria here, a little bit different. Talk about the criteria for a head coach. It's obviously more about decision making. And I think that's interesting, especially as we look at this list, because those things will come out in why certain coaches are where they are.
Yeah, it's a couple of things. It's how well do you win games convincingly, because we know that one-score games are pretty noisy. How well you do and going for fourth downs when expected points or win probability tell you to. It's also how well you do against the betting markets. And if applicable, how well you do as a play caller. Like there's a number of those. And then, and how well you do above the wins above replacement on your roster. So, Andy Reid gets number one here. Andy Reid has always gone. He's all 8 seasons. He's been the Chiefs head coach. The Chiefs have gone over their win total. If you bet over for them, you would have won every single year. Last season, he added to his repertoire by going for it on fourth down 2/3 of the time when applicable, including the 4th and 1 with Chad Henne as his quarterback in the divisional round, which was pretty cool. He and Belichick have the highest the Chiefs and the New England Patriots since 2013 have identical win percentages if you count essentially if you count 2-score or bigger games as 1 win and 1-score games or less as half a win. Those two guys have won 69% of their games if you count it that way. Highest in the NFL. And Reid is a top 5 play caller, has been for years on offense. So that's really why he gets the number 1 nod. And then after that, I think the one that people found the most reprehensible was Matt LaFleur. And I can understand that. But I think when you pull the curtain back on LaFleur, he's been extremely impressive.
LaFleur is the one that I'm very interested to talk about. Let me run through the rankings here and then we can dive in, because I don't think there'll be any qualms with John Harbaugh at 2, LaFleur then at 3, McDermott and Buffalo Bills at 4, Sean Payton at 5, Bill Belichick at 6, and then Kevin Stefanski, I also think is interesting, at 7. But let's talk about LaFleur, because I think the narrative and our opinion on LaFleur probably did about as much of a 180, would you say, as any coach could have possibly had over the course of one season, from where we thought he was the year before to after the season. And I guess that means, a lot of that is giving him credit for a lot of how Aaron Rodgers played, because Rodgers was amazing. He was the highest graded quarterback last year.
Yeah. And I sort of think I take a broader view. So if you view the getting wins above, let's say Pythagorean expectation or war expectation or whatever, and you attribute that to head coach, he sort of has done it 2 different ways to get to 13-3 the last years. In 2019, our friend Ben Baldwin, who we'll have on in one of these podcasts in this series, has documented Aaron Rodgers was not playing well from most of 2017 when healthy, 18, and then 19. He was probably a league average, maybe a 60th percentile quarterback. And that team also didn't have, what we would characterize as a good number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5 receiver. They're dealing with Mercedes Lewis and something called Robert Tonyan at tight end, which those are how Robert Tonyan is a household name now. But then the question becomes, is it the system that's, given rise to that? And they go 13-3. They beat Seattle in the playoffs and they get drilled by San Francisco. And then last season they go 13-3 and Rodgers has an MVP season. An MVP season, despite again the fact that they really have one wide receiver who has sat out games before, and they're, I believe, undefeated in the games that Adams has sat out during the course. And again, that's what the model will pick up for the play calling aspects of it. And I think at some point, once you start to grow this thing out, it's he's done a really good job. And then I'll put it back again. We gravitate to the abhorrent decision he made to kick a field goal down 8 against Tampa in the playoff game And we pull back and say, well, but actually, if you look at admissible fourth downs a season ago, he went for them 75% of the time, which is second in the NFL only to Kevin Stefanski of Cleveland. So you take that, you take the fact that WAR per dollar on the offensive side of the ball in the passing game. So we're talking about wide receiver, quarterback, O-line, with a highly paid wide receiver, highly paid quarterback, by the way, best in the NFL. I think there's a lot on his ledger that is impressive. And as I said in the piece, George Seifert was the 49ers coach, took over for Bill Walsh, went 14-2 his first 2 years. Montana won a Super Bowl in one of them, so it's a little bit different. Montana gets injured in the NFC title game against the Giants in 90, and they have to go with Steve Young. And Seifert petered out for a couple of years, then wins the Super Bowl a few years later. That's the only coach I believe in NFL history that has a better record in the first 2 years of his coaching tenure than Matt LaFleur. So the question becomes, we might see a quarterback change in Green Bay here. If LaFleur can get a Jordan Love team to 10 wins, 11 wins, I think this cements this. That to me is the scariest thing about putting out a ranking where Matt LaFleur's third is yes. What happens when Rodgers is gone.
Yeah, because I think untangling the two of them is tough. And you bring up the 2019 season. I guess my pushback there would be there was a lot of eking things out and getting the right side of variance, that got them to 13-3, that I'm not going to give, that I just don't feel like LaFleur deserves a ton. I mean, he deserves some credit for it, but not a ton of it. And then this year, it, was really made possible by the fact that Aaron Rodgers bought in. Now, does LaFleur still deserve some of that credit? Yes, because Rodgers bought into that, right? But it is interesting to me when I look at an offense that has the highest graded quarterback, highest graded receiver, and highest graded left tackle, and go, okay, that's some pretty good weaponry to have. That's I think the pushback there. Whereas you look at, Kevin Stefanski is a good example. Nowhere near as good of a quarterback. He had a really good offensive line, sure. Did not have receivers anywhere near Devontae Adams, and what a team like that did, or even Kyle Shanahan, who has a way worse quarterback, set of quarterbacks, has had a myriad of injuries, and yet, got a team to the Super Bowl and has, continuously beat teams with just random sets of players on the field.
Yeah. And there is I will say this, the receiving grade for the Packers is 9th, in many ways because, and we've talked about this, receiving is a weak link system that, we haven't quite figured, that's something that I don't think we had the intuition about right away. Right. So I guess, but you're right. I mean, and there are some aspects I don't want to, for the Shanahan thing, I think it's a lot easier to say that he's not a top 7 head coach than it is to say he's not a top 5 play caller. Would you agree?
Yes. And the biggest thing when I look at this list and I think about, okay, who are the people that feel they've been snubbed? And Kyle Shanahan would still be the highest on anyone's board in terms of snubs here.
But I think and I was on Boston TV explaining myself about Bill Belichick at 6, and I was on Bobby Hebert's show explaining Sean Payton at 5. All these people think that their head coach should be higher. I will say this, Belichick for the last 10 years has been one of the worst coaches in the NFL in terms of going for fourth downs when they are admissible, including that Sunday night game that you worked on your way to your Emmy, where they kicked a field goal on 4th and 1 with 30 seconds left in the half to cut a lead from 21-14 to 21-17, thinking that they were getting the ball to start the second half. Belichick's an amazing coach and probably the best coach of all time, but this is looking at right now, and this is also looking at the modern NFL, where when Belichick was moderately aggressive on fourth downs 10 years ago, the rest of the league was behind, right?
Yep.
And now the league has shifted, and this is why I rank John Harbaugh so high. And I personally think, I want to come out and say, I think John Harbaugh is a Hall of Fame coach. And I think that somebody who can win a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco in one decade, and then in another decade be the wokest head coach in the NFL with respect to a lot of things. Now, not perfect because they drafted running back, linebacker in rounds 1 and 2 last year, but like that evolution, I think, is leaving some of these guys behind, and opening the door for somebody like Stefanski. And I'll just say this about, Kyle Shanahan, because I do think Kyle's a great coach, and he has the highest scheme uniqueness in the NFL. And part of me wishes I would have incorporated that instead of the straight rankings, because we use both in Green Line. But as far as head coach is concerned, here are my concerns with Shanahan: is fourth down decisions, you're in the bottom half of the league with him, 42%. I think he can pick running. Like, I feel like they have good running backs on their team, and they still spend money on McKinnon and Coleman, trading up for Sermon. And I think the trade up for Trey Lance will ultimately not matter, because I think it will be, they have a decent enough system where like it won't be that sensitive who that particular guy is. But I think trading that many assets, he did misread the market there, he and Lynch. And I think that's just something where, again, that I don't think that should necessarily keep him off the list, but I think it knocks a little bit of the veneer off of the infallibility that a lot of people are coming at me with for him.
Well, there are a couple lessons here. The first is never listen to people on Twitter.
Well, sure,
but the second is there are two things with Kyle Shanahan that play into why there's both a lot of fairness to this and also why there's a lot of outrage. And we'll get into the offensive play caller rankings after I make this point. The first is the fourth down side of things. The average fan does not pick that up. It's something that gets swept under the rug, especially in games where your team is not competing for a division title or Super Bowl or whatever, right? Those things get washed away. And Kyle Shanahan, with a few very high profile exceptions, and I'll go back to the Baltimore Ravens game that they played, and they end up losing that game, but I thought it was one of the more impressive performances for a road team. And then against the New Orleans Saints in that Super Bowl year, he does not go for fourth downs, fourth and short, which is weird because of the second point, which I'll make, which is one of the reasons he is so lauded is, as you said, the uniqueness of his scheme, but in particular, the uniqueness of the running game, which I think people would be shocked to find out where their expected points added per play ranks over the last 2 years. And I'm going to bring that up when we get into the offensive play callers, but it's indicative of, like, I'm trying to think of the best analogy here, but it's like buying something that looks really, really cool, but doesn't have a ton of utility, and it's like, okay, that's really great. And people might think it's very cool, but does it do that much for you? And I think that is, I'm not saying that what the Niners run game is doesn't do something for them, but it does more in people's minds than people are willing to think about. The one point that I will make, though, is if you look at the passing game in particular, he has had a terrible, of all the guys on this list, by far, the worst quarterbacking situation. I mean, it's not even freaking close. And the fact that he has quarterbacks averaging 8 yards per pass attempt that probably couldn't make another team is amazing. And on top of that, with receivers who are all yak guys, like his ability to scheme open guys, it is dramatic. So the thing that I would say to people is, would Kyle Shanahan be in my top 7 in terms of picking a head coach in the future? Sure. But does that mean that he has necessarily had 2 seasons where he's been a top 7 head coach? Not necessarily.